welcome, Anne Edwards. Thank you very much for coming on to the Ocean in Motion classroom sessions. Just a little heads up in regarding to Anne. She is the Director of Conservation for Sea Shepherd, and she's doing some amazing work. Sea Shepherd does some incredible work globally in regarding to protecting the oceans and conserving the oceans from illegal fishing and everything else that isn't monitored and managed correctly in our oceans. And I'm an avid supporter of everything that Sea Shepherd does, and hence the reason why we're raising money and awareness through this journey that I'm about to undertake for the amazing work that you guys do. And thank you very much for coming on board. I would love to give a little explanation about what you do and the impact that you make, but I think it would be better coming from you. So tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got involved in this journey with Sea Shepherd and the impact that you make.
Thank you, Chris. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to join you on your incredible journey and to reach out to like-minded folks who care about the oceans and want to do something. So I am Director of Conservation for this incredible organization. My history is that I am a lifelong conservation biologist. I've had the extreme privilege of living on 4 continents. I've worked in terrestrial and marine systems. I've worked with local people, and I've run country programs where I've worked with national governments and international funders. And my role in Sea Shepherd is to engage with partnerships across all those levels, all focused on a conservation strategy, which is the ultimate goal is biodiversity conservation and climate resilience. I like to think that I bring this breadth of perspectives because conservation is ultimately a people problem, and there's huge complexity to it. And so I'm just one person helping to try to steer all of this energy, all of this capacity, all of this opportunity, not just for Sea Shepherd, but our partners generally, again, towards long-term biodiversity conservation and climate resilience.
Fantastic. And I think that probably ties into our first question. And so like the key projects that you're really working on at the moment that you're hoping will make enormous amount of impact. I know that, you're very involved with the MPAs and also the IUUs, which I hadn't heard of before we had that conversation. But, a very big part of this project, obviously, that I'm doing is also on climate change and climate action, which also transcends into the ocean and the 30 by 30 campaign to protect 30% of our oceans by 2030 on land and on sea. But I think, you've been a very big part of working towards helping to collaborate with other incredible organizations and authorities on the MPA side. So I think a lot of people, I think it's a great place to start. I think a lot of people aren't aware even of, what an MPA is. When you're involved in ocean conservation, we talk about these words all the time, but there are a lot of people out there that don't know what an MPA is, what its purpose is, and why it's so important that we create them and manage them and protect them, which is what Sea Shepherd does.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. So a little background. We'll go back to the concept of marine spatial planning. So the thing to keep in mind is that word spatial. So the coasts and the near shore and increasingly the offshore are valuable to a whole suite of constituencies. So, they're certainly valuable for recreation. We go and we're on the beach. We go out in recreational boats. We might do recreational fishing, surfing, and so on. But there's also shipping. There's also, underwater cables. There is commercial fishing, which obviously is a huge impact across the oceans. In other words, there's just a lot of players in this realm. And so what marine spatial planning is all about is bringing them together, usually led by governments and supported by civil society, to and totally underpinned by science, the science of the biology of what's going on under the water and what's important. But anyway, bringing this group together to kind of map out what to do where, to prioritize biological diversity in certain spots, but maybe to say, okay, you can run a cable here because it's not as important. And another piece that's really important, especially up here in the Pacific Northwest, are cultural influences, primarily from tribes. So tribal influence is very important. And that's also important in other parts of the world where indigenous cultures have long-standing ways of engaging with the ocean, which we can all learn from, but also need to be respected. So this idea of marine spatial planning is really important. So then we get to what we call MPAs, so marine protected areas. And that's the key there is protection. And that's what Sea Shepherd's all about, is protecting the oceans, protecting the wildlife in the oceans. So that's why we focus on MPAs. And something you'll hear a lot about is 30 by 30. So that is something that's about 5 years old now, but it's something that more than 100 governments, leaders of governments around the world have signed on to this pledge to protect 30% of their lands and their waters by 2030. So it's really become a rallying cry, really a mantra. And because I feel it's a mantra because it's actionable. That's why it works. You can designate protected areas. You can get your governments to make this pledge. You can rally funders to support that pledge. You can get civil society to say, yes, let's protect. So this is happening now. It's expanding dramatically.
And why is that so important? It's just because a lot of people actually aren't aware. Why is 30 by 30 important? What does that mean to us? Yes, we know we need to protect more on land and we need to protect more of the ocean, but why do we need to do that? And there's obviously an incredibly important why, and that's what you're going to tell us about.
Okay. Yeah, so the key is protection. That one word, what does that mean? Let's focus on fishing. So fishing in some parts of the world has been better regulated than others. And in fact, in many parts of the world, there have been little to few levels of regulation. And even when they exist, the key there is that it isn't always enforced. And so as a result, we have a large proportion of the fisheries on the planet are overfished. And so what we are working on directly at Sea Shepherd is to work with local governments to ensure that their regulations are supportive of sustainable fishing, including no-take zones. And then we work with those governments, their Navy, their Coast Guard, their fisheries observers, to go out and make sure the regulations that are on the books are held. And the goal is to reduce this extraordinary fishing pressure in these countries to allow fish populations to recover to support climate resilience.
Which is a global problem at the moment. And I think as you mentioned, you know, these you're talking about these no-take zones. I was always under the impression that all MPAs were no-take zones, but that's not correct either. Is that
that is absolutely correct? Yeah. So the term MPA is widely used, and what it refers to is at least some level of protection, which is so then people are now talking about fully protected areas, which are no-take zones, and sometimes they are no-entry zones. As opposed to other areas that are considered protected because there's limits on, say, what kind of gear type you can use, or which species if you catch them, you have to throw them back, hopefully alive. So those are levels of protection, but they also represent a compromise with fishing communities in the region. So this is where science comes into play, as well as advocacy, to determine which of the fish are highly threatened and which ones can be taken, but at lower levels. The thing about it is that it really comes down to enforcement, because their rules are being broken all the time. There's boats coming, you know, across borders. There's boats using the wrong fishing gear. There's boats that are keeping fish they're not supposed to keep. And so this is why eyes on the water is so critical. This is why Sea Shepherd's work is so important, is because we apply and we provide an at-sea platform that is really missing or just really limited in so many countries that don't have the resources to be out there. They may have the regulations, but they don't have the vessels out there to enforce these protected areas. So the idea of MPA, marine protection, the key is protection. You need the laws, but you also need the enforcement.
Yeah, great. I think that leads in perfectly into the next question, which is like, what are the greatest challenges out there in those marine protected areas? And it seems like it comes directly back to the enforcement of the laws in regarding to ensuring that the overfishing isn't happening, or ensuring that certain of the vessels aren't allowed to go into the different zones and take these kind of things, which seem like that is a global problem. And most people, I think, assume that it's just the challenge is just local, with local fishing communities going into those zones and overfishing and what have you. But I think people aren't aware of like the magnitude of these giant fishing fleets that are coming over from China or from Korea or from Japan, and they are able to cross oceans and stay out indefinitely and just take more and more and manipulate their systems and the communication devices and the navigation devices so that they can go in and take what they shouldn't be. And that seems like one of the greatest challenges. Is that what you're finding is the biggest problem, or are there many other different levels to that you'd like to go into?
Exactly. I wouldn't, it's a serious problem. I can talk a little more about that. I can't say it's the biggest problem, because there's problems at every level. Where there's opportunity, there seems to be, a pushing of the rules. So to go back to the distant water fleets from Asia, predominantly from China, yeah, that's happening, where there's thousands of distant water ships coming from China, and it has grown exponentially just say in the last 5 years.
Sorry, and you're seeing that also like right far down, as you mentioned yesterday. Is that like right as far down as in the Galapagos?
Yeah. So what's happening there is, this is a really important distinction. There are territorial waters, which are 200 miles off of continents. And it's recognized that each country has that as their national territorial waters. And beyond that is also known as areas beyond national jurisdiction, or we think of it as the high seas. And the rules, different rules apply. And out there, with few exceptions, so tuna being one of the exceptions, the single biggest exception, there's really no rules. It's like the Wild West. And so there is a big push at the UN to get a high seas treaty. It hasn't gone through yet, but until it does, it's perfectly legal for these distant water fleets to come right up to these national territorial boundaries and stay outside of them, and deplete all the fish. It's not moral, it's not ethical, but it's currently legal. Because of the lack of laws. But we frequently see that there are incursions into national waters where, as you referenced, they have they're supposed to have a signal that called AIS, which is read by satellites, and it identifies that one boat, and it's supposed to be on all the time, and it's being monitored so you can tell where they are relative to the national border. Well, yes, they turn that off. They come inside the national waters, they fish, and then they go back out into the high seas and turn it back on. And that is an increasing problem. That's a serious problem.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a challenge. And I know that, like, as we were talking about there, I would have thought that there'd be something in place that no matter what, every single vessel that is undertaking fishing commercially needs to not only have one of those, maybe they have to have two. So there's always a backup, so they don't have an excuse that they say, oh, well, I don't know why it's not working. It shouldn't, right. It shouldn't be the case. But it doesn't seem like that's something that's happening at the moment. So I don't know how we get around that. Are there
Yeah, no,
solutions?
there's evidence, clear evidence of an intentionally appearing to be a different vessel, or there's a lot of manipulation, and that's on the high seas. That's global. There's also something called VMS, which is a cell phone based system, which nations are requiring their own vessels to use in order to track artisanal fisheries. So for example, Ecuador has 45,000 artisanal fishing boats, and they're required to have VMS. So we are able to track them, but not every country requires it or provides the ability to do that.
Yeah, fascinating. And I know that an area that you are working quite intently on is also the corridors that connect a lot of these spaces, which go into, they're almost like the migratory corridors of different species and different mammals, whales, and everything else. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I know that some of those stem from that area that we're talking about at the moment, which is sort of the South Pacific, correct?
That's right. So the Eastern Tropical Pacific. So the equator goes right through the middle. So the Galapagos, we're talking about the Galapagos Islands, but also north and east of there. So if you look at Central America and South America, it makes a big circle. So within that circle, you have three tectonic plates that have created these extraordinary diversity of islands and seamounts and undersea canyons. And you also have 5 ocean currents, which I'm sure you can relate to. So you have the current coming from starting up in Alaska and coming all the way down to the equator. You have right, and you have another current starting at the tip of South America coming all the way up, and then you have the equatorial current and the equatorial countercurrent. Anyway, the extraordinary thing about this area is that it's an area of incredible biodiversity and incredible endemism, where you only find certain species in this area because it's so nutrient rich. So you have the Galapagos Islands, and then to the north you have Cocos Islands, and then which is Costa Rica. And then if you go east, you have Malpelo Island, which is Colombia, and then you have Coiba Island, which is Panama. So this region is connected, and science has shown us through the tagging of sharks primarily, but also turtles, whales, that there's what they call marine superhighways that connect, say, the Galapagos and Cocos. So the Galapagos has the highest density of sharks in the world, and Cocos has the second highest density of sharks in the world, and Malpelo has the third highest density of sharks in the world. And these are just the sharks. But they are traveling along these marine corridors. And since sharks have been targeted for their fins dramatically over the last 20, 30, 40 years, they have been decimated in this region because I've read a report that says, based on genetic analysis, that the majority of shark fins that end up in Southeast Asia come from this region, from the Eastern Tropical Pacific.
Which is terrifying when you think of how far that is away, and how, it's so easy to target those kind of species. And if you don't have these corridors that are protected, that are getting created with the help of yourself at Sea Shepherd in multiple different countries, that literally is an easy way to target them and just decimate the populations. And we know how important the sharks are to the balance of the entire ecosystem in total in the ocean.
Right. So there's been protection for the Galapagos. There's been protection very small around Cocos, for example. But now with 30 by 30, both Costa Rica and Ecuador have stepped up on the global stage and said, we're going to expand our protection of our waters, to meet the 30 by 30 goal. But at the same time, they're targeting these corridors that connect Cocos Island and the Galapagos Islands, used by sharks and all the other species. That's where they're focusing their protection. So that's the MPA that works. It's a no-take zone, at least on the Ecuadorian side, and it's targeting the biodiversity hotspots, these migratory corridors, these critical important spots for climate resilience. And that's how marine spatial planning is supposed to work. That's how science informed marine spatial planning works best, but we still need the enforcement.
Well, isn't it? I guess it's a great example of like collaborating together for the same common goal and vision. And I think that's always been a giant challenge, is to get countries to align on the same common goal and vision. And I think as I've heard and explored, you know, Costa Rica have been very, very proactive over the last sort of 5 years to become an environmental conservation giant and leader of what we should all be doing. And I think they're a great example and role model. And I think it's awesome what they're doing from a sustainability and a natural power usage on land, but they're also transferring that to the ocean as well. And it's very difficult to try and get people to imagine these corridors that need to transcend multiple different countries. And when you're transcending multiple different countries and there's zones in the ocean, it's very hard for people to work out how do you protect that. And that's where you guys come in. So maybe touch on that a little bit further.
Yeah, no, I'd really like to. I'd like to emphasize that. So we set the stage. We have these, you know, quite far offshore, large expanses of ocean. So the new extension of the Galapagos is 60,000 square kilometers, 30,000 of which is a no-take zone, but the other 30,000, they are limiting the type of gear you use. So in order to protect this, you know, you could call it a paper park right now, you need boats on the water to make sure that no one is fishing in the no-take zone, and then to board ships, observe and monitor and board ships in the other zone to make sure that they are following the rules. And that's where Sea Shepherd comes in. And that's why I'm excited to be working with Sea Shepherd, is because we are uniquely positioned to have this at-sea capacity to partner with governments to get the enforcement out there. Costa Rica and Ecuador and Colombia and Panama all are to be credited with, with these new MPA expansions, but it comes on top of a history of and still ongoing of just decimation of the shark populations, you know, declines by 90% in support of the shark fin trade. So even though, you know, the islands, right around the islands were protected, these corridors were not. Well, the pressure is going to remain, and so we need to stay there. And it's the boots on the ground, if you will, of Sea Shepherd that's going to make that happen.
Well, I think another thing to also mention is that I think in the past it was always so difficult to be able to have the authority to be able to collaborate with these countries. But you know, Sea Shepherd's been instrumental in creating these partnerships with authority that gives them the authority to be able to go out and do that, where a lot of ships weren't able to go, that wasn't able to police these kind of areas because they just didn't have the capacity, the funding, the boats, the everything. And I think by giving you guys the authority to be able to be those eyes and ears and the police of those kind of waters, it really does have a massive effect. And you know, when you see some of these movies that have come out, whether it be Seaspiracy or these others that really bring awareness, and I think a lot of people are just shocked in regarding to what's happening out there, because people just aren't aware unless you're in the conservation ocean space where you see what's happening. Most people are just unaware because they don't see what's happening in the ocean. And that's why it's so important for everything that you guys do, because without that, there's no control, there's no one watching over what's happening, and no one taking action to minimize and mitigate the damage that's happening to the ocean population and the biodiversity, which is under threat.
That's right. And that's where Sea Shepherd has always shined throughout our whole history, is that we have been the spotlight out in the Wild West, out in the big black box of the ocean. And we brought that vision of what's really going on. But what's different now is that we recognize that to make a difference for conservation over the long term, of course, it makes sense. We have to work with governments. So I just want to be clear, to slightly correct something you said, which is Sea Shepherd does not police anyone. We have no jurisdiction. We have no authority. We don't claim to. In the past, if you look at some of our old videos, you know, you might get a different impression, but that is not what we're doing now, because it's not right. We recognize these are territorial waters, that they are, so we work with the oversight of the government. We work with agreements. We bring the government agents that they deem necessary on board. We support them. And when the boarding happens, we're there because we like to film, we like to document, but they are the authority. And similarly, we are a platform for science. And we do have scientists, but we are focusing our own research mostly on this concept of illegal fishing, because that's the primary thing we do. But we also are profound, and have been for years, you know, strong supporters of again, eyes, in this case, eyes under the water, what's going on with the animals. And we plan to do that extensively going forward, both in terms of the keeping eyes on the incredible diversity of animals there, but also you know, monitoring the ocean as it changes with climate, and hopefully monitoring it as it changes with increased protection. We'd love to be able to help document the value of increased protection.
Yeah, and as you said, I think it's that collaboration with the authorities in each one of those areas and local waters. I think that really does make the impact, and that's sort of what I meant by policing. And I think by having the Coast Guard or the authorities from whatever country on board, I think is just a testament to how, when you work together, what impact you can make. And I think that's really, really incredible. And I think another thing to also bring up, which I think is really interesting, is that you don't just do work in and around the ocean creatures, but you've done a hell of a lot of work with the seabirds, sea life, above the water as well. And I know that you mentioned you'd done your PhD on some work that you did in one of the offshore islands, which is Midway Island, I think, on the seabirds and how they're also affected by some of the ocean health and what's happening with the plastic pollution. And I know that there was a lot of focus on those beautiful creatures called the albatrosses, which are some of my favorite birds that I love seeing when I'm out in the ocean. Tell us a little bit about that, because I know you've done some extensive research, and I would imagine your findings were quite profound, that really impacted on a lot of areas of your life, and utilizing that to be able to help make impact going forward.
Yeah, so this was the focus of my PhD research and my postdoc research, where this was a few years ago, when albatross especially were being absolutely decimated by bycatch, by fishing boats, offshore fishing boats. And so a lot of my work had to do with supporting a broad team of people who were working on trying to mitigate the impacts of this bycatch on seabirds, and the development of ways to, you know, scare the birds away and keep them away from these hooks and these nets that were drowning them and were driving populations down in totally unsustainable ways. So that was the big focus of what I was doing. Again, I've always had this theme of focusing on wildlife, but looking for active ways to mitigate, to lessen the impact of what humans are doing. That's kind of a theme throughout my life. But when I was out there and I saw the plastics, I was on the island, and this was, again, a few years ago, before there was a big groundswell globally and understanding of plastics. But I consider the Laysan albatross chicks to be sort of the canary in the coal mine when it comes to plastics, because of the visuals that I'm sure you've seen, and many people have now seen, of the large chicks, maybe the size of a chicken or something. I mean, they're quite large, lying there dead and desiccating with their whole abdominal cavity full of plastic just lying there where they lay down and died. And yes, that is profound. And now we're seeing it, across species. And in fact, we're even now seeing it, in our own blood. But those albatross were like the canary in the coal mine, I think, visually.
And that brought a huge amount of attention to what's really going on out there in the ocean, and at lengths like way further beyond what people thought was happening, and in places that you wouldn't think that it would have any effect whatsoever. And I think the other thing that a lot of people also aren't aware of was, they think of these amazing birds and they're like, well, how can a bird that flies get entangled in fishing nets, because it's meant to be in the sky? So how does that all happen? And what is the magnitude of that happening, to what scale? Because obviously are they attracted to the fishing nets because that's where all the fish are getting pulled in?
Yeah, so this was actually a big focus of my research, which of the birds are being attracted to boats and which ones aren't, and what's the impact on the population. But the bottom line is that for those who learn to follow boats, which is an increasing number of albatross, especially as marine systems change and their own food that they used to be able to rely on are shifting, they tend to land on the water at the back of the boat. And for long lines, especially as the lines are being put out the back of the boat or the side of the boat and are going underwater, they have big pieces of bait on them. And right as they hit the water and then just go underwater slightly, the birds will go after them and grab them. And then they get hooked and they get drowned. And with trawl nets, it's a little bit different. It's as they're pulling in the fish and about to pull them on board, the birds are there and they get caught in the nets. So the problem for seabirds generally, but albatross in particular, is that albatross have no natural predators that we know of. So they live as long as humans. They're very long lived, and they produce, a pair will produce one chick every 1 or 2 or 3 years. So they're very slow to reproduce. So when you take out an adult, you are significantly harming the population. And especially the great albatrosses of the southern hemisphere, where they only breed every other year, they've been in population declines of 1% a year, which doesn't sound like much, but it is profound.
Yeah, and if there's no other way that's going to change unless we make changes, then if you just look at the stats, you don't have to be a mathematician to know that it's going to be an extension in the future if we don't get it remedied. And I think when you compound the fishing nets and entanglement with the plastic pollution, that compounding effect is terrifying on what the results and the outcome are going to be. When we talk about these kind of things, and I always try, we know that there are challenges out there, we know that there are problems that need to be addressed. And a lot of people look at it as just this overwhelming challenge that we can do nothing about. But I always try and look at things with a sort of solution-driven mindset, and like, what are the solutions? Are there a whole lot of ideas and solutions that you have in place, or that you're talking about or trying to implement in order to be able to minimize and mitigate and manage that, to be able to improve on the situation going forward? And maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the first thing that I think of is the way that most of us interact with the world, which is through what we consume. And so the first thing I think of is food. And a highly significant thing you can do is to just transition to a plant-based diet. And it's really, a lifelong journey. If you kind of fall off the wagon here or there, just keep nudging yourself back. It's really the compounding effect of your lifetime impact. Just keep nudging towards where you think you need to be. Plastics is another one, obviously. We're surrounded by them, but we have choices. If you go to a concert, don't grab that single-use water bottle of plastic and throw it away. Just don't do it, just small choices along the way. The third one is energy, right? We all have different circumstances in our lives, so it's hard to prescribe doing one exact thing or another, but just keep nudging. It's what the cumulative effect is really what matters. One specific one I think about is relatively recent, is reef safe sunscreen. That's something we can all do and is really important. So what you consume, the thing is, how do you know what to do? I think the very next important thing is just education. And so educate yourself. You know, there's so much information out there. If you're wondering what the impact of something is, you could probably look it up online, look at multiple sources, and just put energy into educating yourself. And then the third thing is public policy. So to whatever extent and whatever works, you know, in your time of your life. If you just had a baby, it's not a good time. If you're, you know, retired, it's a great time, you know, to, you know, first of all, everyone should vote. That's hands down. But beyond that, everyone can get involved with public policy at some level. There's like, so we go back to marine spatial planning, you know, there's groups out there. You can go to committee meetings. You can write comment periods. There's just a lot of ways to get involved with public policy if you educate yourself.
And use your voice, stand up for what you believe in, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, as you said, you know, we all have choices each and every day, and it's about making small incremental change each and every day in some small way. And it all adds up. And when you add that together with millions of other people doing it, it does create massive impact, massive change. And that's what we want to see in the world, not only today, but in the future. And I think that the last thing I was thinking about, is there anything that's happening in the space about with the fishing nets? Because obviously those are a significant challenge to marine mammals, to all sea creatures, and as we're talking about the bird life as well. Is there anything that's being done in that space? I know Sea Shepherd does an amazing job of pulling a lot of the nets that they find out of the water, so it doesn't have the impact, negative impact on a lot of marine creatures. But is there anything else being done by other countries or anything to be able to minimize the amount of negative impact that the fishing nets have, and ensuring that they don't get just left and cause so much devastation to the ocean health?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is another issue that has really taken off in the last 10 years. The term to Google, if you want to know more, is ghost nets. What they are abandoned nets, sometimes intentionally, unfortunately, often, you know, they get stuck on a rock, so on. But anyway, they're nets that are still in the ocean, still fishing indefinitely, because they don't degrade at any great rate. And so you see videos of just full of fish, and they also attract, because they have fish in them, that becomes prey. They attract other things. So you'll see seabirds in there, you'll see marine mammals in there, you'll see lots of diversity of fish in there of all different stages of rotting. So it's really a serious issue. But a lot of countries around the world are recognizing that. There's the Global Ghost Gear Initiative. There's a lot of legislation, a lot of funding that's going towards removal, but yes, it's an ongoing process, a very significant thing that is there's increasing awareness and increasing work on it, but it is not a small thing. Yeah.
No, that's great. And it's great to hear that there is actually something being done, and something, you know, some sort of solutions and a lot more backing and support on how to minimize it and eradicate it in the future. But I think that is a giant challenge, but at least the awareness is there, and when the awareness and the knowledge is there, people can take action and minimize that impact. But I don't want to take too much more of your time. I know that we've gone over, but very informative, educational, and inspiring, the work that you do. So keep up the amazing work that you do, and implementing all the policy change and the collaboration with other authorities to be able to make that impact, and do everything that Sea Shepherd's great at doing, which is conserving and protecting our oceans and our sea creatures out there. And last words of wisdom in regarding to how we can all be better as humans, that you want to leave everyone with today. I'm obviously going to share the links on Sea Shepherd and all the amazing work that people do, you do, and the team does. And obviously, if people want to get involved and support, they can go to the website and they can volunteer and all those kind of things. But any last words of wisdom of how we can all be better as humans and make less of a negative impact and more of a positive impact?
Well, I guess I just want to make a shout out to our incredible volunteers, both on our ships and on land. And yeah, go to our website, because that's where you can find out how to join our crew. Incredible bunch of people from around the world. I guess I just want to end on as inspirational note as possible. I mean, you certainly are inspiring all of us. Just, get out into nature. Educate yourself about the issues. Our world is such a phenomenally, amazingly beautiful place. If you step outside of your house and your building in your city, the natural world is awe-inspiring. Get into it, learn about it, and I think you'll be inspired and can take the right steps from there.
Thank you very much for that, Anne. I think you're 100% right. Get out in nature. We don't have to look at our screens all the time. The best screen is the one we're surrounded with, which is nature. And that's where everything's real. And when you go and play in it, that's when you fall in love with it and want to protect it and respect it even more. Anne Edwards, thank you very much for your time. You're an inspiration. Keep up the amazing work you do with Sea Shepherd. And we look forward to hearing from you and speaking with you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And safe journey, man. Safe journey.